God created man in his image. In his own image, he created them, male and female. Right? We're created in his image. But why male and female? And it has everything to do with the fact that we're created in his image. But why is it this way? Why male and female? And how does that connect with God's image? And I think it does in three ways. Why did God create us male and female? Well, he wanted to populate the planet. Well, that's part of it, but a small part. Remember, everything about the way he made us was so that we would reflect his image. And I think in large part, I think this is probably the most important part, he created us male and female so that we could reflect his holiness. What does it mean when we say, what do we mean when we say that God is holy? What does the holiness of God mean? God's a holy God. What do we mean? Yeah, that's ultimately what the word means. It means that God is set apart. We might think it refers to the purity of God, his holy character. And it certainly does. That's certainly a part of his holiness. But the essence of holiness is the set-apartness of God. It's not his moral purity, but rather it means being set apart or being distinct. God makes this really clear. There's a couple passages in the Old Testament where he's teaching Israel about this. And this is in Leviticus 10. I just jumped ahead, but Leviticus 10 to 11. He says this, he's saying this to the Levitical priests. He says, "The Lord spoke to Aaron saying, 'Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you when you come to the tent of meeting, so that you will not die. This will be a perpetual statute throughout your generation.'" Why weren't Aaron and the priests supposed to drink wine? Was it because wine was immoral? Was it because drinking wine was an immoral act? I'm not trying to open the debate on Christianity and alcohol, but I'm just recognizing that wine was a basic staple in Israel's culture in the time. So when the rest of Israel drank wine, were they sinning? No. Because it wasn't a matter of this is a morally pure act. It was a matter of the priesthood were to be set apart. He said, "And so you do this will be a perpetual statute through your generation," verse 10, "and so as to make a distinction between the holy, the set apart, and the profane." And we think of profane as profanity, terrible thing. No, profane is just the not set apart, the common, okay? And between the unclean, that's the ceremonially unclean, and the clean. And likewise, he refers to this in Ezekiel. The condemnation against Israel in Ezekiel is that they stopped recognizing the distinction between the holy and the profane. And they brought all kinds of unclean sacrifices into the temple. And that was one of the reasons God brought them under judgment into exile. In Exodus 15, Moses writes, "Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness?" And think about translating that set-apartness for a moment. Majestic in your set-apartness or your uniqueness or your distinctness, awesome in glory, working wonders. And when you read it that way, it's no surprise then when you come a few chapters later to Exodus chapter 20, the first two commandments is, number one, "I am the Lord your God. You'll have no others before me." And two, "You shall not make any image." Why? What would be wrong with making a picture to represent God, to help us focus our mind's eye on God as a means of worship? The problem is that would desecrate or that would compromise the set-apartness of God. He's completely distinct. He's unlike anything else. That's what it means for him to be holy. So to associate the absolute holy God with anything is to deny the distinction that makes him holy. Do you see that? Peter Jones said, and I think he's probably right here, that holiness has more to do with geography than it does morality. That God is holy because he is set apart. He's not the creation. He's not the things he's made. So God is holy, and interestingly, God makes things holy because he is set apart, because he is holy rather, he sets things apart. He makes things holy in his creation by setting them apart. God is distinct from his creation. That's what makes him holy. Therefore, he makes things holy by setting them apart, making distinctions for his holy purpose. And if you go back to Genesis and you read the creation account in this light, it'll completely change the way you see it. Because you'll see the way God creates, he creates by making distinction. He creates by making things holy, right? Day one, what did he make? He separated the light from the darkness, or the day from the night. He made a distinction. Day 2, the waters above from the waters beneath, right? He made a distinction. Day 3, the waters from the land. Okay? Then day 4, 5, and 6, he fills these distincted regions, the skies, the waters, the land. He fills them. Plants, animals, birds, fish, each one creating according to their kind. You can't mate a cat and a dog and get a cat dog or a dog cat, right? There's a certain amount of variability within the species, right? So a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are related, even though, but you can never breed one to become a cat because they're all created according to their own kinds. They're made distinct according to God's creation purpose. And therefore, God's holiness is also reflected in all that he created, including and perhaps especially our gendered bodies. Because as his image bearers, he created us to be distinct as well. He took humanity as a being and he made a distinction within humanity. So that we, in our humanity as a whole, would itself reflect the distinction of a holy creator. And I think, therefore, this is then attached to reflecting God's image. Therefore, God said, this is back to Genesis 1, God said, let us create man in our image, in our likeness. And remember the God we're talking about here. We're not talking about the generic God that everybody believes in. There's some God out there. No, the Christian God is the triune God. We ought not mistake that. This is fundamental to our faith. The Trinity is the God we worship. And this God is unique in that in his being, he is one. There's unity in God's being, right? So the Father is God, as the Son is God, as the Holy Spirit is God. They share unity in their being, but there is distinction in their persons. There is diversity, which is actually the only thing that makes God intelligible as a relational God, that he possesses in himself unity in being, but diversity in his persons. There is fellowship within the one true God, eternal fellowship, and hence he is a relational God. That is God's very nature. And he says, let's make man in our image. So he creates man. You know the story, right? Puts man into a sleep. First puts him in the garden to work it. And man starts to work the garden. Adam starts to exhibit or exert the stewardship over creation that God made him to have, right? You will rule over the creation and subdue it. He started doing that in the garden. He started naming all the animals. He exerted authority over creation by saying what the animals would be called. But then God saw that man was by himself and he said, this is not good, for the first time. And what wasn't good? It wasn't that man was lonely, because he wasn't. Who was man in perpetual fellowship with in the garden? God. He wasn't lonely. He was incomplete because, as Moses writes, he did not have a helper suitable or sufficient to him. Well, what do you mean by that? Suitable to what? Suitable to the very reason that God made him, to bear his image and reflect his image around the earth. He couldn't reproduce himself, for one, but he also did not reflect in his own individual being the very nature of God in its totality. So God put him into a sleep, and he took out of the man, from his side, a rib, right, and fashioned the woman. Why didn't God just get another lump of dirt, right, like he did with Adam, and fashion it, just make a few more curves, and then breathe life into that dirt and say, now, woman, here you go. You're now both people of the dirt. You're both people of the earth. That's what Adam means, earth, right? Why didn't he do that? Because he wanted mankind uniquely to reflect his image in our being. And he brings the woman to the man, and what does Adam say? She is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She is one with me. We're one in our very being because God took her out of my body and made her for me. We share the same flesh. We share the unity of the same being. But did they become one person? Oh. She shall be called Isha, woman, for she was taken out of Ish. And so we have God in his creation purpose in making humanity, male and female, that we reflect in our humanity as distinct, in the male-female distinction, we reflect together the unity and the diversity that is present in the very nature of God. Does that bring a little more significance to you, to the male-female distinction, than just, you know what, it just makes the most sense because, you know, children and best for family nurturing and all the rest. Those arguments can be made. But at its very root, the male-female distinction is essential for man's reflecting, his creation purpose of reflecting God's image back to him. And that's why we can't tamper with it. That's why we can't get with the times and go along with the changing ebb and flow of culture. Because to do so would be to deny the holiness of the Creator in our very beings. And we cannot do that. Thirdly, and I think this is worth mentioning, although it requires a little development on its own, so we can reflect God's love. And this really does point to the marriage relationship between the man and the woman. For this reason, Paul's quoting in Ephesians chapter 5, he's saying, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother. He's quoting Genesis chapter 2 in order to justify the relational bond and responsibilities in the marriage relationship, right? The wife, he says, to honor her husband, and the husband to love the wife. Why? Because of God's creation purpose. He says, this is a profound mystery, but actually what I'm talking about is Christ in the church. What I am trying to illustrate for you in painting a picture for you of God's creation purpose in the husband-wife, the man-woman bond, the one flesh union in marriage, where in essence two people become so united together that to harm the one is to harm the other, that for one to not love the other is to hate his own body, Paul says. How can you not love your wife? Don't you know she's a part of your body? Don't you love your own body? If you do, you can't not love your wife. He says, but I'm talking about Christ and his church. What I'm trying to give you is a human illustration to understand the kind of love that Jesus has for his bride. Okay. And again, that takes the male-female distinction and the one flesh union of marriage, and it pulls it right out of culture. It's transcultural, and it roots it in the eternal purpose and the eternal character and image of God. That's why we can't mess with it. That's why we can't be culturally relevant in that respect of trying to alter our perspective on these things.